was almost like the plot of Help had become real, and they actually had a lot of people who suddenly wanted to dismember them.
Welcome to WatchMojoUK, and today we're looking at the 10 biggest scandals and controversies to strike the Beatles.
If it had said television is more popular than Jesus, I might have got away with it.
Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Anyway, there were four of us in that band, and it just seems to be George and I, Yoko, Sean and Julian here.
In 1988, only 5 years into the Hall of Fame's existence, it was time for the Beatles to be inducted. They were inducted by Mick Jagger in a ceremony for the ages, but one of the three remaining Beatles was conspicuously absent, Paul McCartney.
I don't have to say much because I'm the quiet Beatle.
Even 18 years after the Beatles had split, they were still having business differences, disagreeing and suing each other multiple times over the years.
It is unfortunate Paul's not here because he was the one who had the speech in his pocket.
Numerous references to Paul's absence were made, notably George pointing out that as the quiet Beatle, he wasn't the one who should be making the speech, and then Yoko Ono saying that if John was still alive, he would have come to the ceremony.
I wish John was here. He would have been here, you know. He would have come.
Let It Be.
Come on, you always get annoyed when I say that. I'm trying to help you know, but I always hear myself annoying you.
The entire Let It Be album and documentary project were blighted from the beginning. These were the sessions that saw John Lennon at the height of his addiction and George Harrison's temporary departure from the band.
Just run along, son. I'll see you later. Rock and roll band, you know. Boom, ba boom, ba boom.
There was a lot of conflict between the film's director, Michael Lindsay Hogg, and the band, who made him recut a lot of it to remove the many scenes of John and Yoko on the project.
I think I'll be leaving the band now.
When?
Now. Get a place. Watching the NME and get a few people.
When it finally did come out, the Beatles had only just split up, and many people saw the film as a real-time document of their collapse.
Where's George? Well, he didn't want to hear. He would have said, I'll do it at home.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what he's going to do. He's going to go home. So am I. Yeah. I'm going to go home to record in the studio.
In a way, it is that, though they did, of course, record Abbey Road after the filming of Let It Be. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Let me confirm quickly a couple rumors with you.
Yes.
The Beatles had already been experimenting with psychedelics for years by this point, with their influence apparent on both Rubber Soul and Revolver. But never was this clearer than on Sgt. Pepper, with its colourful imagery and surreal lyrics. So it's no surprise that people latched onto the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds as being a very thinly veiled reference to LSD, a substance that all four of the Beatles had experienced by 1967.
Has it ever been settled whether Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was a code for anything?
It never was, and nobody believes me.
However, John Lennon, who wrote the song, always said that it was actually inspired by Alice in Wonderland and a drawing his son Julian did one day.
This is the truth. My son came home with a drawing and showed me this strange-looking woman flying around. I said, what is it? He said, it's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Whatever the truth, there was a minor moral panic around the classic tune. Helter Skelter.
When I get to the bottom, I go back to the top of the slide.
This significantly more controversial song came out a year after Lucy on the White Album. The song itself was absolutely ahead of its time and remains one of the heaviest, dirtiest songs the Beatles ever made.
But don't you want me to love you?
But it's also well known as one of the inspirations of Charles Manson, who believed Helter Skelter's lyrics were predicting the end of the world and signifying that the Manson family should make their move.
Helter Skelter. Helter Skelter.
This, of course, culminated in the cult's 1969 murders, regarded by many as the moment the 1960s truly ended. The Beatles were horrified at the time, though this was one instance of many where false meanings were read into the band's lyrics. Apple versus Apple. For decades, there were protracted legal issues between the Beatles company, Apple Corp., and the tech giant, Apple Inc., known as Apple Computer at the time. You might think that the Beatles and their music have nothing to do with computers, so there's no real danger of anybody confusing the two.
What is Apple, John?
It's a company we're setting up which involves records, films, electronics which make records and films work.
However, in the 60s, the Beatles wanted Apple Corp to get into all kinds of industries, including consumer electronics, which made the whole situation more complex. And then, when Apple Inc. got into music with iPods and iTunes, there was more legal action. Eventually, everything was settled, and the two Apples have been peacefully coexisting since the noughties.
It's just trying to mix business with enjoyment.
Pleasure.
Because we're in business, we find ourselves in business.
Butchery.
Bob Whitaker was one of the photographers who took our pictures, and he came up, we all put on white lab coats, and we pretend to be mad professors.
Is this the most controversial album cover of all time? Well, maybe, until Two Virgins came along 2 years later.
The photographer was a bit of a surrealist,
The notorious photo shoot was for Yesterday and Today, one of their alternate US LPs, and the cover image shows the band in white coats holding chunks of meat and dismembered dolls. It was a grisly image, and a very bold decision for a mid-60s Beatles album.
We really got into it, and that's how we felt, yeah.
Soon deemed too contentious, the cover was recalled, and a new cover was glued on top.
It got out in America, and there was some kind of fuss.
Fans got wind of this and started taking the sleeves apart to see the secret image. It's easy to find the pictures online now, and it's tame by modern standards. Paul is dead.
It was 20 years ago today. Sergeant Pepper taught the band to play.
Even more from the long tradition of trying to find hidden meanings in commercial hits, in the late 1960s, the world was swept up in this conspiracy theory that Paul McCartney had died and had his death covered up. If you believe the legend, the clues are everywhere that Paul McCartney died in a car accident in which he lost his head and was then replaced with a lookalike named Billy Shears. That's what the lyric introducing the one and only Billy Shears means at the beginning of Sgt. Pepper, of course. This culminated in a Life magazine photographer cornering McCartney at his home in Scotland to see if he was still alive. Brian Epstein's death.
Looking back now, it was Brian Epstein. He was the guy who got us famous, really.
Undoubtedly, the Beatles were made by their savvy manager, Brian Epstein. It was Epstein who insisted on their clean-cut image, with matching suits and haircuts, which was such a huge part of their early success, along with their outstanding songwriting chops, of course.
I heard about them through a lad who was asking for a record by them in one of my stores.
But on August 27th, 1967, Epstein tragically passed away in his home as a result of substance misuse. Aged just 32, his death made headlines, and the Beatles sadly couldn't attend his funeral because they were worried about their fans following them and ruining the service.
Ever since Mr. Epstein passed away, it's never been the same.
I mean, we've been very negative since Mr. Epstein passed away.
His loss left the band in disarray, and by all accounts, the group never recovered. The Eastmans versus Klein. With the Beatles still in disarray following Epstein's death, and none of them having any idea on how to rule the Beatles as a business, they looked for a new manager to take over their legal affairs.
Did you get in touch with John? I couldn't get it. Is he joining us?
I don't know, because Mal couldn't get him either. No, you can only get the machine.
It came down to the Eastmans, Paul McCartney's new in-laws, and Alan Klein. The story is widely told as Paul McCartney pushing for the Eastmans to be the band's new business managers, while the other three rebelled against McCartney, seeing him as controlling and settling on Klein.
We'd called it because we were not playing together. Because we lived together when we played together. We were in the same hotel, up at the same time every morning, all day.
These rifts couldn't be healed, and the band disintegrated in 1970, paving the way for a myriad of legal disputes. Years later, though, and it became clear that McCartney was right, as Klein ended up suing John and George for millions.
Good night, Paul.
Say good night, John.
Good night, Paul.
Good night.
Bigger than Jesus.
It was all because of that interview John had given while on vacation.
By 1966, George, John and Ringo were sick of the constant touring and live performances because of Beatlemania, but this controversy was the thing that made McCartney give in to his bandmates and agree that the Beatles would retire as a live act. This came after other controversies around their Japanese concert venue and them accidentally snubbing the president of the Philippines, leading to them being chased from the country.
John was saying, we're so famous, we're so honored, you wouldn't believe the fame. I mean, we're bigger than Jesus.
But then John Lennon infamously said in an interview he published in America that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, remarks that were taken massively out of context and spiraled out of control.
I was pointing out that fact in reference to England, that we meant more to kids than Jesus did, or religion at that time.
After this tour, the Beatles never played live in the US again. Let us know in the comments which controversy you think got out of hand.
And then there were two.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojoUK and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.